We are coming to you live with developments out of Israel that are rewriting every assumption this conflict has operated on since its first day. Wave 60 is underway, and the word wave no longer captures what the footage is showing. Take a moment with that number, 60. Not a single prolonged assault, not one unbroken stream of fire from a single direction. 60 separate, organized, sequenced missile operations launched against Israeli territory across the duration of this conflict. Each one planned, each one executed, each one a demonstration that Iran's willingness to absorb punishment on its own soil has not translated into any reduction in its capacity to deliver punishment in return. And now, with Wave 60 active and footage pouring in from Tel Aviv at a rate that our teams cannot process fast enough, it is clear that the architects of this conflict did not plan for this number, did not model this scenario, did not build a defense architecture capable of surviving it. 6 hours ago, Iranian state media made an announcement. It was brief. It carried no elaboration, no context, no explanation of circumstances. It did not need any of those things to be understood. Ali Larijani, former Speaker of the Iranian Parliament, former head of the Supreme National Security Council, a political figure whose name and family lineage placed him within the absolute core of Iranian revolutionary power, has been confirmed dead. The broadcast ended, and then the missiles began. What is arriving in Tel Aviv right now is the answer to that announcement. Not a measured response, not a calibrated military action designed to achieve specific battlefield objectives within a defined escalation framework. What is arriving in Tel Aviv right now is something that the Iranian command has decided requires no further justification, no further proportionality calculation, no further reference to the rules of engagement that have loosely governed the previous 59 waves. The footage is speaking for itself, and what it is saying is that Tel Aviv, as a functioning urban environment, is being systematically erased in real time. We are not using that language for effect. The videos arriving from every corner of the metropolitan area, from the financial district, from the port, from the residential neighborhoods to the north and south, from the roads leading out of the city that are visible in drone footage still transmitting, show a level of simultaneous, geographically distributed destruction that has no precedent in this conflict. Previous waves produced impacts, fires, damage to specific structures and specific areas. What Wave 60 is producing is different in a way that the word damage cannot adequately contain. It is comprehensive. It is citywide. It is the difference between a conflict that has been hitting Israel and a conflict that is now consuming it. And there is nothing rising from the ground to stop it. The Patriot batteries that were positioned to defend Tel Aviv are silent. The Iron Dome installations that have been firing and recalibrating and firing again across 59 previous waves are no longer generating intercepts at any meaningful rate. The layered architecture, the system of overlapping coverage zones and complementary intercept envelopes that American and Israeli planners spent decades and billions of dollars constructing, has been reduced by 60 waves of sustained attrition to something that exists on organizational charts and in pre-conflict briefing documents, but no longer exists in operational reality over Tel Aviv tonight. This outcome did not happen suddenly. It happened gradually, across 60 engagements, in a way that each individual wave made slightly worse, without any single wave making it catastrophically obvious. Interceptor magazines depleted, resupply convoys disrupted, radar installations targeted specifically in later waves to degrade the sensor network that the interceptors depend on for targeting data. Maintenance cycles interrupted by operational tempo that exceeded the design assumptions of the systems being maintained. The architecture was not defeated in a single brilliant stroke. It was worn down, exhausted, reduced incrementally to the point where Wave 60 arrived and found nothing left to push against. Iran understood this arithmetic before the conflict began. The strategy visible in retrospect, the pacing of waves, the variation in attack vectors, the deliberate targeting of logistical and sensor infrastructure alongside missile defense hardware, was not improvised. It was designed specifically to produce the conditions that exist over Tel Aviv right now. A city exposed, a defense architecture consumed, and a wave large enough to take full advantage of both. The weapon system delivering Wave 60 into that undefended city deserves specific examination, because Iran did not treat this wave as an occasion for conservation. The Fatah-2, the upgraded successor to the hypersonic glide vehicle that first forced a reassessment of Iranian strike capability earlier in this conflict, is what trajectory analysis of tonight's engagements is indicating. The original Fatah represented a genuine leap in Iranian offensive capability. The Fatah-2 extends that leap further. Its terminal approach geometry is flatter, compressing the radar detection window to a point where even a fully operational Patriot battery operating at peak efficiency would struggle to generate a clean intercept solution. It maneuvers laterally in its final seconds of flight in a pattern that is irregular enough to defeat predictive intercept algorithms. It does not follow the arc that the computer calculates. It arrives somewhere other than where the defense expected it. Against a Patriot system already hollowed out by 60 waves of expenditure, and against an Iron Dome architecture that was never built for this threat in the first place, the Fatah-2 does not need to be launched in enormous numbers to produce the results visible in the footage arriving right now. It simply needs to be launched. The defense cannot respond, and so it arrives. Now let us turn to the man whose death has made Wave 60 what it is. Ali Larijani's significance within the Iranian state was never fully captured by any single title he held, because his real significance was not positional. It was relational. It was the product of decades spent navigating between the clerical hierarchy, the Revolutionary Guard, the parliamentary establishment, and the supreme leadership, moving between those centers of power with an access and a credibility that almost no other figure in Iranian public life possessed. His brother Sadiq Larijani headed the judiciary. His brother Mohammad Javad Larijani was a senior diplomatic figure. The Larijani family was not simply a political dynasty in the conventional sense. It was woven into the structural fabric of the Islamic Republic in a way that made its members something close to institutional pillars, individuals whose presence was part of what the system looked like, and whose absence changes what the system is. When Tehran announced his death, it was not announcing a military casualty in the way that militaries announce the deaths of officers. It was announcing something closer to a desecration. The death of a figure of this category is processed inside the Iranian political and military establishment, not as a loss to be absorbed and compensated for through organizational restructuring. It is processed as a statement of intent by the adversary, a declaration that nothing and no one is outside the target envelope, and that processing produces a demand from the Revolutionary Guard, from the clerical establishment, from the street, that the response match the scale of the violation. Wave 60 is that response. The Iranian public watching footage of Larijani's death announcement alongside footage of Tel Aviv burning is not experiencing cognitive dissonance. It is experiencing within the framework of its own political culture and its own historical memory, something that feels like justice. Like the scales of a conflict that has cost Iran enormously, in cities, in infrastructure, in lives, in the physical destruction of things it took generations to build, being brought into some form of balance. That is not a Western analytical framework, but it is the framework that is driving Iranian decision-making tonight. And any analysis of what Wave 60 means that does not account for that framework is an analysis that will produce wrong conclusions. The American position in this conflict has moved over the course of 60 waves from confident co-belligerent to something that Washington does not yet have a comfortable word for. The operation was launched with a set of premises. That American and Israeli combined capability was so superior to anything Iran could bring to bear that the conflict would be short, decisive, and manageable in its costs. That Iranian missile forces would be degraded in the opening strikes severely enough to prevent sustained retaliation. That the Patriot and Iron Dome architecture, supplemented by American naval and air assets, would provide Israeli population centers with protection sufficient to contain the political damage of any Iranian response that did get through. Every one of those premises has been disproven, not by a single dramatic failure, but by 60 waves of an adversary that refused to behave according to the script written for it. An adversary that dispersed its most capable systems before the conflict began, that paced its escalation deliberately, that targeted the defense infrastructure that protected Israeli cities with as much priority as it targeted anything else, that absorbed devastating strikes on its own territory and kept launching. And that is now on Wave 60, launching the most consequential barrage of this entire conflict into a city that the American-Israeli alliance told the world it would protect. The diplomatic architecture that was quietly being assembled in parallel with the military campaign, the Qatari channels, the Turkish back corridor, the indirect communications that both Washington and Tehran maintained official deniability about, while both sides kept them open. That architecture depended on a specific set of conditions to produce results. It depended on both sides being close enough to mutual exhaustion that a pause could be framed as strategic restraint rather than surrender. It depended on Iranian leadership retaining enough domestic political space to accept something short of total vindication. It depended on no single event occurring that was large enough to make negotiation politically impossible for the Iranian side. The death of Ali Larijani is that event. There is no version of Iranian domestic politics tonight in which the leadership that oversaw his death sits down at a table mediated by Qatari diplomats and accepts a ceasefire that leaves the adversary responsible for that death intact and operational. It does not exist. The political space for that outcome closed the moment Tehran made its announcement. And Wave 60, the scale of it, the comprehensiveness of it, the message embedded in the targeting choices visible in the footage, is Iran making certain that everyone watching understands that the space has closed. Both sides of this conflict are now in a position that neither side's strategic planning fully accounted for. Israel is absorbing destruction of a scale and duration that its population was not prepared for, and its defense architecture was not built to prevent across a 60-wave timeline. The United States is politically and militarily committed to a conflict whose costs have exceeded every public projection, and whose trajectory is now being driven by Iranian decision-making rather than American and Israeli planning. Iran has demonstrated a capacity for sustained offensive operations that Western analysis systematically underestimated, but it is doing so at a cost to its own territory and population that is generating internal pressures of its own. None of the three parties to this conflict are where they expected to be at this point, and the distance between where they are and where they expected to be is precisely the distance that makes finding a way out so difficult. We are tracking every development across the Tel Aviv theater, the broader Israeli territory, Iranian military and political communications, and every diplomatic signal still moving through channels that remain functional. Wave 60 is still active. The smoke over Tel Aviv has not cleared, and what the city looks like when it does, and what decisions are made in Jerusalem, in Washington, and in Tehran before that moment arrives, will determine whether this conflict has found its outer boundary, or whether Wave 60 is the point from which a new and darker phase begins. Stay with us.